The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the dusty town of Silver Creek, Montana Territory, and Eleanor Hayes stepped down onto soil that felt as foreign and unforgiving as the grief that had hollowed out her chest these past 6 months. She wore black from neck to ankle, the widow's weeds that marked her as a woman who had lost everything. And as she stood there with her single carpetbag clutched in trembling hands, she wondered if coming west had been the greatest mistake of her life, or the only choice that might save it. The town sprawled before her like a promise half-kept, wooden buildings bleached gray by the relentless sun of summer 1882, their false fronts reaching toward a sky so blue it hurt to look at. She had left Philadelphia behind, left the pitying glances and the creditors and the empty house that still smelled like Thomas, her husband of 3 years who had died suddenly of pneumonia, and left her with nothing but debts and a hollow ache where her heart used to beat. "Madam, you need help with your bag." The stagecoach driver tipped his hat, his weathered face creased with concern. "No, thank you," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I can manage." She had written to her cousin Margaret 2 months ago, desperate for somewhere to go, someone who might take her in until she could figure out what came next. Margaret had married a rancher and moved to Montana 5 years earlier, and her letters had painted a picture of wide open spaces and fresh starts. But when Eleanor asked at the general store for directions to the Brennan Ranch, the shopkeeper's face fell. "I am real sorry to tell you this, miss, but Mrs. Brennan passed 3 weeks ago. Childbirth took her and the baby both." The older woman behind the counter shook her head sadly. Her husband sold the ranch and moved back east, just left last week. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. She gripped the counter, her knuckles white against the worn wood. "I see," she managed to say, though she did not see at all. She had nowhere to go, no family left, no prospects, and exactly $14 to her name. "You got somewhere else to stay?" the shopkeeper asked gently. Eleanor shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She would not cry. She had cried herself empty in the months after Thomas died, and there were no tears left, only this vast desert inside her where hope used to grow. "There is a boarding house 2 streets over," the woman offered. "Mrs. Patterson charges fair rates." With no other option, Eleanor took her bag and walked through the dusty streets, past the saloon where piano music jangled discordantly, past the sheriff's office and the bank and the blacksmith's forge that rang with the sound of hammer on anvil. The boarding house was a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but it was clean enough, and Mrs. Patterson agreed to let her stay for $2 a week. "I will need to find work," Eleanor said as she counted out coins from her dwindling supply. "Not much call for ladies' work in a town like this," Mrs. Patterson said bluntly. "Can you cook or clean? I could use help with the laundry, pay you $1 a week plus your room." It was barely enough to survive on, but Eleanor nodded. She had been raised a gentleman's daughter, had never worked a day in her life before Thomas died, but grief and necessity had taught her that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The days blurred together in a haze of hot water and lye soap, her hands growing raw and red as she scrubbed other people's clothes and hung them to dry in the merciless sun. She kept to herself, spoke to no one unless spoken to, and felt herself becoming as gray and worn as the sheets she washed. At night she lay in her narrow bed and wondered what the point of any of it was, this endless succession of empty days that stretched ahead like the Montana plains, flat and featureless, and without horizon. 3 weeks into her new life, Eleanor was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house when she heard horses approaching. She glanced up to see 3 riders pass by on the main street, cowboys by the look of them, their hats pulled low against the afternoon glare. Two of them were laughing about something, but the third sat his horse with a quiet ease that caught her attention despite herself. He was tall even in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that was all hard planes and angles, softened only by the kindness in his eyes when he happened to glance her way. Their gazes met for just a moment, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her, like a door opening in a house that had been locked and shuttered for too long. Then he touched his hat brim in greeting and rode on, and she was left standing with a wet sheet in her hands and her heart beating faster than it had in months. "That is Caleb Thornton," Mrs. Patterson said from the doorway, making Eleanor jump. "Owns a spread about 10 miles north of town. Good man, honest, works hard. Lost his parents to scarlet fever when he was just 16 and built that ranch up from nothing." She gave Eleanor a shrewd look. "He is not married, if you were wondering." "I was not wondering," Eleanor said quickly, heat flooding her cheeks. "I am in mourning." "Mourning does not last forever, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, not unkindly. "Life goes on whether we want it to or not." But Eleanor did not want life to go on. She wanted Thomas back, wanted the future they had planned, the children they would have had, the years of quiet contentment that death had stolen from her. She finished hanging the laundry with fierce determination, trying to scrub the image of Caleb Thornton from her mind. But his eyes haunted her all the same, brown and warm, and full of something that looked like understanding. She saw him again 2 days later when she went to the general store to pick up supplies for Mrs. Patterson. He was loading sacks of grain onto a wagon, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and tanned dark by the sun. Eleanor told herself to walk past, to keep her eyes down and her mind on her business, but as she reached the store entrance, she heard a shout and the crash of breaking wood. She spun around to see that one of the wagon wheels had broken, and Caleb had been knocked off balance, falling hard on his side with a sack of grain landing on top of him. Without thinking, Eleanor rushed over, kneeling in the dust beside him. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her hands already checking for obvious injuries with the practical efficiency she had learned nursing Thomas through his final illness. Caleb coughed and pushed the grain sack aside, wincing as he sat up. "Just my pride, mostly," he said, his voice a low rumble that did strange things to her pulse. Up close, she could see that his eyes were not just brown but flecked with gold, and there was a scar along his jawline that made her wonder what story it told. "You might have bruised your ribs," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice clinical even as her hands trembled slightly. "You should have the doctor look at you." "I have had worse," Caleb said, but he was looking at her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of how close they were, of the way the sun caught in his hair and the strong line of his throat above his collar. "I do not think we have been properly introduced. Caleb Thornton." "Eleanor Hayes," she said quietly, pulling her hands back and clasping them in her lap. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his gaze dropping to the black bombazine of her dress. "Yes." The word came out sharper than she intended, a wall thrown up against the warmth in his eyes. Something flickered across his face, understanding perhaps, or disappointment. But he nodded and climbed slowly to his feet, offering her a hand up. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip, the heat of skin against skin. He pulled her up easily, steadying her when she stumbled slightly, and for a heartbeat they stood so close she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather and sun-warmed cotton. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Hayes," he said formally, releasing her hand and stepping back. "I appreciate your kindness." Eleanor nodded and fled into the store, her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to break free. She bought what Mrs. Patterson needed in a daze, barely able to focus on the shopkeeper's chatter, and when she emerged again, Caleb was gone, though his broken wagon remained. That night she could not sleep, tossing and turning in the narrow bed, her mind full of images she had no right to entertain. Caleb's smile. The way his hand had felt wrapped around hers. The warmth in his eyes that suggested he might be lonely too, that he might understand what it was to lose everything and have to build a life from ashes. But she was a widow, still deep in mourning, and even if her heart had not been buried with Thomas, what could she possibly offer a man like Caleb Thornton? She had nothing, was nothing, just a ghost in widow's weeds scrubbing other people's laundry, and trying to survive from one empty day to the next. The next Sunday, Eleanor attended church for the first time since arriving in Silver Creek. She was not sure what drew her there, whether it was habit or hope or simply the need to be among people, to remember that she was still alive even if she did not feel like it. The little church was packed with ranchers and their families, townspeople in their Sunday best, and she slipped into a pew near the back, keeping her eyes down. The sermon was about new beginnings, about the parable of the prodigal son and the father who welcomed him home, and Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes for the first time in weeks. She did not feel welcomed anywhere, did not feel like she had a home to return to, and the ache of that knowledge was almost more than she could bear. After the service, people milled around outside, talking and laughing, and Eleanor was about to slip away when she heard her name. Mrs. Hayes, would you join us for lunch? It was Caleb, standing with an older couple who beamed at her with friendly curiosity. This is Jim and Mary Watson, my nearest neighbors. Mary is convinced I am going to starve to death living on my own, and she cooks enough to feed half the county every Sunday. We would be delighted to have you, Mary said warmly, her round face crinkling into a smile. Any friend of Caleb's is a friend of ours. Eleanor wanted to refuse, to retreat back into her shell of grief and solitude, but there was something in Caleb's eyes that stopped her. A quiet hope that made her realize he was as lonely as she was, that maybe he needed company as much as she did, even if neither of them wanted to admit it. I would like that, she heard herself say. Thank you. They drove out to the Watson ranch in Caleb's new wagon, the wheel having been repaired, and Eleanor sat beside him on the bench seat, acutely aware of every bump in the road that jostled them together, every time his arm brushed hers. He did not say much, seeming content with the silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that felt less like absence of words and more like understanding. The Watson Ranch was a sprawling affair with a whitewashed house and a barn that had been painted red, surrounded by fields where cattle grazed lazily in the summer heat. Mary proved to be as warm as her smile suggested, and she swept Eleanor into the cool kitchen and put her to work mashing potatoes while she checked on the roast. It is good to see Caleb with company, Mary said casually as she basted the meat. He keeps too much to himself these days. Always working, never takes time to enjoy life. He seems like a good man, Eleanor said carefully. The best, Mary agreed. Took care of his parents until they passed, then his younger sister too, until she got married and moved to Oregon 2 years back. He has given so much of himself to other people. I worry he has forgotten how to do anything for himself. Eleanor thought about that as they sat down to lunch, the four of them around a scarred wooden table laden with food. Caleb had pushed his own grief aside to care for others, had built a life out of duty and hard work, and she wondered if maybe that was why he understood her so well, why his eyes held that same shadow of loss that she saw in her own reflection. How are you finding Silver Creek, Mrs. Hayes? Jim asked as he passed her the potatoes. It is very different from Philadelphia, Eleanor admitted, but I am grateful for the work Mrs. Patterson has given me." "Laundry work is hard on a woman," Mary said with a frown. "You are much too educated for that. Anyone can hear it in your voice." "Can you read and write?" "Yes, of course," Eleanor said, surprised by the question. "The school teacher just left to get married," Mary said, her eyes lighting up. "Moved to Billings with her new husband. The town has been looking for someone to replace her, but no one suitable has applied." "You should talk to the mayor about it." Eleanor's heart leaped at the thought, then fell just as quickly. "I have no teaching experience," she said, "and I am not sure they would want a widow teaching their children." "Nonsense," Mary said firmly. "You are respectable, educated, and clearly intelligent. That is more than most can say. And being a widow makes you more respectable, if anything, not less. You should at least inquire." Caleb had been quiet through this exchange, but now he spoke up. "Mary is right. You would make a fine teacher, Mrs. Hayes. The children need someone who can give them a proper education, and you need work that will not break your back." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact and kind, made Eleanor's throat tighten with emotion. "I will think about it," she said softly. After lunch, Caleb offered to drive her back to town, and as they bounced along the rutted road, he cleared his throat. "I hope Mary did not overstep," he said. "She means well, but she can be a bit forceful sometimes." "She was kind," Eleanor said. "You all were." "I have not had much kindness lately, and I find I have forgotten how to respond to it." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then said, "I lost both my parents within a week of each other. Scarlet fever swept through like wildfire, and they were gone before I could even understand what was happening. For a long time after, I felt like I was just going through the motions, like nothing mattered anymore because they were the people who made life matter. I understand something of what you are feeling, Mrs. Hayes." Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the pain he carried, the weight of his own grief that he had learned to bear with quiet dignity. "How did you go on?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I found things that needed doing," he said simply. "My sister needed caring for, the ranch needed running, the cattle needed tending. At first, it was just putting one foot in front of the other, but eventually I realized that life could have meaning again, even if it was not the meaning I thought it would have. It was different, but it was still worth living." His words settled into her like seeds planted in dry soil, waiting for rain. She did not know if she believed him yet, did not know if she could imagine a life that felt worth living again, but the fact that he had found a way gave her the smallest flicker of something that might have been hope. "Thank you," she said as they pulled up in front of the boarding house. "For lunch and for your honesty." "Any time," Caleb said, and the smile he gave her was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, warm and full of promise. "I hope you will consider the teaching position. I think you would be wonderful at it." Eleanor climbed down from the wagon, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months, and as she watched him drive away, she realized that maybe, just maybe, coming west had not been a mistake after all. The next morning, she went to see the mayor. He was a portly man with a magnificent mustache and a harried expression, and when she explained her purpose, his face lit up like Christmas morning. "Can you start next week?" he asked eagerly after the briefest of interviews. "We have 20 children in need of schooling, and they have been running wild for a month now without proper supervision." "I can start Monday," Eleanor said, and felt something shift inside her, like a door opening onto a room full of light. The salary was modest, but more than she had been making doing laundry, and it came with the use of the small cabin behind the schoolhouse, a space of her own after weeks of living in Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. Eleanor threw herself into preparing lessons, cleaning the one-room schoolhouse, arranging the desks and slates and readers. It gave her purpose, something to think about besides her grief. And when Monday morning arrived and 20 curious faces stared at her from behind their desks, she felt truly alive for the first time since Thomas died. Teaching was harder than she had anticipated, but more rewarding too. The children ranged from 6 to 14. Farm kids and ranch kids with dirt under their fingernails and mischief in their eyes. But they were eager to learn, and Eleanor discovered she had a gift for making lessons engaging. She taught them reading and writing, arithmetic and history, and in teaching them, she began to remember who she had been before grief had stripped her down to nothing. Caleb came to town every Saturday for supplies, and he made a point of stopping by the schoolhouse to see how she was doing. Sometimes, he brought her fresh vegetables from his garden or a dozen eggs, or once a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. They would talk on the schoolhouse steps, easy conversations about the weather and the town and nothing in particular. But Eleanor found herself looking forward to those Saturdays with an anticipation that felt dangerously like joy. "You have made a real difference here," Caleb said one afternoon in late August as they sat in the shade of the schoolhouse porch. "The children are learning and you seem happier too." "I am," Eleanor admitted. "I did not think I could be, but I am." Caleb looked at her with those warm brown eyes, and for a moment she thought he might say something more, might put words to the thing that was growing between them, fragile and new as spring grass. But he only nodded and said, "I am glad." September came, and with it the first hints of autumn. The leaves began to turn gold and red. The air took on a crisp edge in the mornings, and Eleanor realized she had been in Silver Creek for 3 months, that she had built a life here without quite meaning to. She had friends now, people who greeted her on the street and invited her to church socials and quilting bees. She had work that mattered, a home of her own, a future that extended beyond the next load of laundry, and she had Caleb, though she was not quite sure what to call what they had. A friendship, certainly, built on shared grief and quiet understanding, but there was more to it than that, a current running beneath the surface like an underground river, powerful and patient. One Saturday in late September, Caleb arrived at the schoolhouse with a wagon instead of on horseback, and his expression was unusually serious. "I have something I would like to show you," he said, "if you are willing to take a drive with me." Eleanor agreed without hesitation, climbing up onto the wagon seat beside him. They drove north out of town, past ranches and fields and open prairie, the mountains rising in the distance like cathedral spires. After about half an hour, Caleb turned the wagon onto a narrow track that led through a stand of cottonwoods and emerged into a wide valley. Eleanor caught her breath. The valley was beautiful, sheltered by low hills and crossed by a clear stream that sparkled in the afternoon sun. Grass grew thick and green despite the late season, and wildflowers still bloomed in scattered patches of gold and purple. It was the kind of place that felt untouched, sacred almost, and she could not imagine why Caleb had brought her here. "This is mine," Caleb said quietly, pulling the wagon to a stop. 320 acres, prime grazing land, good water rights. I bought it 2 years ago with the idea of expanding my herd, but I have never done anything with it. It has just been sitting here, waiting." "It is beautiful," Eleanor said, and meant it. Caleb climbed down from the wagon and came around to help her down, his hand steady on her waist. He did not immediately let go, and she did not step away, and for a long moment they stood there, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the pulse beating at the base of his throat. "Eleanor," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, the sound of it in his low voice sending shivers down her spine. "I know it has not been long, and I know you are still in mourning, and I have no right to ask this of you, but I cannot keep quiet any more." Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break free of her chest. "Caleb, please, I am falling in love with you," he said, the words coming out in a rush like he had been holding them back too long and they could not be contained anymore. "I have been fighting it because I know it is too soon, but I see you and I see someone who understands loss, who has been broken and is choosing to be brave anyway. I see your kindness with the children, your strength in building a new life from nothing, and I cannot help but love you for it." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, hot and unexpected. "I loved my husband," she whispered. "I loved Thomas with everything I had." "I know," Caleb said gently, reaching up to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "And I would never ask you to forget him or to pretend that love did not matter. But he is gone, Eleanor, and you are still here, still alive. And I am here too, and I am asking if you might let yourself love again, not instead of him, but alongside the memory of him." She closed her eyes, felt the warmth of his hands on her face, the solid reality of him standing before her. Thomas was gone, had been gone for 9 months now, and the grief had not disappeared, but it had changed, had become something she carried rather than something that carried her. And somewhere in the process of building a new life, of teaching children and making friends and talking with Caleb on Saturday afternoons, she had started to heal without even realizing it. "I am afraid," she admitted, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "I am afraid of loving someone again and losing them. I am afraid of betraying Thomas's memory. I am afraid of so many things." "I am afraid too," Caleb said. "I am afraid of not being enough, of you waking up one day and realizing you settled for a simple rancher when you deserve so much more. But I think fear is a poor reason not to try for happiness, and I think you are the bravest woman I have ever met." Eleanor let out a shaky laugh, tears still sliding down her cheeks. "I do not feel brave." "You are," Caleb insisted. "You left everything you knew and came west alone. You built a new life from nothing. You wake up every day and choose to keep going even when grief makes you want to give up. That is the very definition of brave." She thought about that, about the long months of simply surviving, of putting one foot in front of the other because she did not know what else to do. She thought about teaching the children, about the satisfaction of watching understanding dawn in their eyes, about the way her little cabin felt like home now. She thought about Caleb, about his kindness and his strength, about the way he made her feel seen and understood and valued. "I think I might be falling in love with you too," she whispered, and it felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The smile that broke across Caleb's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, radiant and full of joy. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and when she did not, he kissed her with a gentleness that made her heart ache in the best possible way. It was nothing like kissing Thomas had been, and that was all right because Caleb was not Thomas, and this was a different love, shaped by different experiences and different needs. It was sweet and tender and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Eleanor felt like she had crossed some invisible threshold, had stepped from one life into another. "I want to give you this land," Caleb said, still holding her close. "I want you to have something of your own, something no one can take from you. You can build a house here if you want, or run cattle, or just leave it wild. It would be yours, Eleanor, no strings attached." Eleanor pulled back to look at him, shocked. "Caleb, I cannot accept that. It is too much." "It is not enough," he countered. "You came west with nothing but grief, and you have worked so hard to build a life. You deserve to have something solid beneath your feet, something that is yours alone. Please, let me do this for you." She searched his face, saw only sincerity and love, and felt something crack open inside her, the last wall around her heart crumbling to dust. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because you gave me a reason to live again," Caleb said simply. "I was just existing before I met you, just working myself to exhaustion so I did not have to think about how lonely I was. But you walked into my life in your widow's weeds and your quiet grief, and you reminded me that there is more to life than duty and hard work. You reminded me what it feels like to hope." Eleanor kissed him again, pouring into it all the gratitude and love and wonder she felt, and when they finally broke apart, she whispered, "Yes, yes, I will accept the land, and yes, I am falling in love with you, and yes to whatever comes next." They spent the rest of the afternoon walking the property, Caleb pointing out where the best grazing was, where a house might be built to catch the sunrise, where the fishing was good in the stream. Eleanor felt lighter than she had in a year, felt like she could breathe fully for the first time since Thomas died. The grief was still there, a permanent scar on her heart, but it no longer defined her, no longer was the only thing she could feel. "I do not want to rush you," Caleb said as they drove back toward town in the gathering dusk. "We can take this as slow as you need. I just needed you to know how I felt, and I wanted you to have the land regardless of what happens between us." Eleanor reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I want to see where this goes," she said. "I am not ready for anything more than this yet, but I want to try. Is that enough?" "That is more than enough," Caleb said, squeezing her hand. "That is everything." They began courting in earnest after that, though it was a courtship unlike any Eleanor had known. Caleb would come to town on Saturdays and Sundays, and they would take long walks or have dinner with the Watsons, or simply sit on the schoolhouse steps and talk until the stars came out. He never pushed her for more than she was ready to give, seemed content to let their relationship unfold at its own pace, and Eleanor loved him all the more for his patience. October brought the first frost, and with it a letter from Thomas's brother in Philadelphia. The creditors had finally settled his affairs, and there was a small amount of money left over, enough to cover the debts Eleanor had left behind and send her a bit extra. It was not much, but it felt like closure, like the final thread tying her to her old life had been cut, freeing her to fully embrace the new one she was building. She showed the letter to Caleb one evening as they sat by the fire in her cabin, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "It feels strange," she admitted. "Like that part of my life happened to someone else, someone I used to be but am not anymore." "You will always carry it with you," Caleb said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "But it does not have to define you. You get to decide who you are now, Eleanor. That is the gift of survival." She tilted her head up to look at him, this man who had given her so much without asking for anything in return, and felt a rush of love so intense it took her breath away. "I love you," she said, and it was the first time she had said the words out loud, and they felt right, felt true, felt like coming home. "I love you too," Caleb said, and kissed her until she forgot about the past and could only think about the future stretching out before them, full of possibility. In November, the town held a harvest dance, and Caleb asked Eleanor to accompany him. She hesitated, knowing that appearing in public together would set tongues wagging, but she was tired of hiding, tired of pretending that her feelings for Caleb were anything less than real and deep and permanent. She wore a dress the color of deep plum, the first colored thing she had worn since Thomas died, and when Caleb called for her at the cabin, the look on his face made her feel beautiful for the first time in over a year. "You are stunning," he said, offering her his arm. "I am going to be the envy of every man there." The dance was held in the church hall, which had been decorated with autumn leaves and lit by dozens of candles. The whole town seemed to be there, and when Eleanor and Caleb walked in together, she felt every eye turn toward them, But instead of judgment, she saw mostly approval, smiles and nods from people who knew them both and seemed genuinely happy to see them together. They danced together, Caleb's hand warm and steady at her waist, and Eleanor let herself relax into the music, into the simple pleasure of being held by someone who loved her. Other couples swirled around them, and she caught Mary Watson's eye across the room, saw the older woman beam at her with undisguised delight. "People are talking," Eleanor murmured as they spun through a waltz. "Let them talk," Caleb said. "I am not ashamed of loving you, and I do not think you are ashamed of loving me." "I am not," Eleanor agreed. "I am just not used to being happy. It feels strange, like I am doing something wrong." Caleb pulled her a little closer. "Happiness is never wrong," he said firmly. "You deserve it, Eleanor. You deserve every good thing." Later, they stepped outside into the cold November night, needing a break from the heat and noise of the dance. The stars were brilliant overhead, the Milky Way a river of light across the darkness, and Eleanor shivered in the chill air. Immediately, Caleb shrugged out of his coat and draped it around her shoulders, and she burrowed into the warmth of it, breathing in the scent of him. "I have been thinking," Caleb said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully, "about the future, about what I want." Eleanor's heart began to beat faster. "What do you want?" He took both her hands in his, looking down at her with such love in his eyes that she felt tears prick at the corners of hers. "I want to marry you, Eleanor. I want to build a house on that land I gave you and fill it with children and laughter. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to grow old with you, to face whatever comes together instead of alone." He paused, took a deep breath. "I know it has only been a few months, and I know you might need more time, and I will wait as long as you need me to wait. But I wanted you to know what I am hoping for, what I am working toward." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face again, but they were good tears, happy tears, tears of overwhelming emotion. "I want that too," she said, her voice thick with feeling. "I want all of that, Caleb. I want to marry you and build a life with you and be happy again." "Then marry me," he said, and pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small sapphire that caught the starlight. "It was my mother's. I would be honored if you would wear it." Eleanor held out her left hand, still trembling, and let him slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her, and when she looked up at Caleb through her tears, he was smiling that sunrise smile that made her heart feel too big for her chest. "Yes," she said, and kissed him, pouring every ounce of love and gratitude and hope into that kiss. "Yes, I will marry you." They told the Watsons first, the next day over Sunday lunch, and Mary cried happy tears and insisted on hosting the wedding at their ranch. They told the children on Monday, and Eleanor's students cheered and peppered her with questions about whether she would still be their teacher after she was married. "Of course," she assured them. "Being married will not change that, but it would change other things," she knew. She would move out to the ranch Caleb had built, would help him run his cattle operation, would become a rancher's wife as well as a teacher. It was a future she had never imagined for herself, nothing like the life she had planned with Thomas, but it felt right in a way that went bone deep. They set the wedding for the first Saturday in December, wanting to be married before the worst of winter set in. Eleanor wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mary helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers from the valley that would become her land. The ceremony was small, just close friends and neighbors, but it was perfect, and when Caleb kissed her after they were pronounced man and wife, Eleanor felt like her life was finally beginning again, like she had stepped out of the shadow of grief into sunlight. The wedding reception was a joyful affair, with music and dancing and more food than 50 people could possibly eat. Eleanor danced with Caleb, with Jim Watson, with the mayor and the blacksmith and half a dozen ranchers she had come to know over the past months. She laughed until her sides hurt, and her face ached from smiling, and she realized that this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of grief, but the ability to feel joy alongside it. That night, Caleb carried her over the threshold of his ranch house, a sturdy two-story structure he had built with his own hands. It was not fancy, but it was solid and warm and smelled like wood smoke and pine, and Eleanor loved it immediately. He set her down gently in the main room, and she looked around at the space that was now hers too. The fireplace and the simple furniture and the windows that looked out over miles of rolling prairie. "Welcome home," Caleb said softly, and Eleanor turned to him, this man who had given her back her life, who had loved her through her grief and shown her that happiness was still possible. "I love you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I love you too," Caleb replied, and kissed her, and the rest of the night was just for them, a celebration of love and new beginnings and the future they would build together. The winter was long and cold, with snow piling high against the house, and the wind howling across the plains like a living thing. But inside, the ranch was warm and cozy, and Eleanor discovered a contentment she had never known, a deep sense of belonging that came from being exactly where she was meant to be. She continued to teach through the winter months when weather permitted, though there were weeks when the snow was too deep for anyone to make it to town. On those days, she helped Caleb with the ranch work, learning to care for the cattle and mend fences and do 100 other tasks she had never dreamed she would need to know. Her hands, which had grown soft again during her teaching months, developed new calluses, and she wore them with pride. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and read together, or Caleb would teach her to play checkers, or they would simply talk, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. Eleanor told him about Thomas, about their courtship and brief marriage, about the pain of watching him die and being powerless to save him. Caleb listened without judgment, holding her when the memories became too much, and she loved him for understanding that her past did not diminish what they had, that she could honor Thomas's memory while still fully loving the man she had married. Caleb told her about his parents, about his sister who had moved to Oregon and wrote letters filled with stories of her own growing family. He told her about the loneliness of running the ranch alone, about the nights when he had wondered if this was all there was, hard work and empty rooms, and the slow passage of seasons. "You changed everything," he said one night as they lay in bed, Eleanor's head resting on his chest, his fingers combing lazily through her hair. "You walked into my life and made me remember what it feels like to be alive." "You did the same for me," Eleanor said, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "I thought grief was all I had left, but you showed me there was room for so much more." In February, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. At first she was afraid to believe it, afraid to hope after all the loss she had experienced, but as the weeks passed and her body changed, the reality settled in. She was going to have a baby, was going to be a mother, and the joy of it was almost overwhelming. She told Caleb on a snowy evening, pulling him into the bedroom to show him the tiny baby clothes Mary had helped her start sewing. For a moment, he just stared at them, his face unreadable, and Eleanor felt a flicker of fear. What if he was not ready? What if this was too much too soon? Then he looked up at her, and his eyes were shining with unshed tears, and he pulled her into his arms with a fierceness that took her breath away. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Eleanor, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" She asked, needing to hear him say it. "I am more than happy," he said, pulling back to cup her face in his hands. "I am grateful and amazed and so in love with you I can barely think straight. Thank you for giving me this, for giving us this." They celebrated quietly, just the two of them, and later Eleanor lay awake thinking about the miracle of it all. A year ago, she had been drowning in grief, had thought her life was over in any way that mattered. But she had come west, had found Caleb, had built a new life from the ashes of the old one, and now she was carrying their child, a living symbol of hope and new beginnings. Spring came late that year, the snow finally melting in April to reveal the greening prairie beneath. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed normally, though she was plagued by morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon and made teaching difficult some days. But she persevered, knowing the children needed her, and Mary Watson stepped in to help when Eleanor was too ill to manage. By May, Eleanor's condition was obvious to everyone, and she reluctantly gave up teaching, knowing she needed to rest and prepare for the baby's arrival. It was harder than she had expected to say goodbye to the children, even temporarily, but they threw her a party on her last day and presented her with a quilt they had all worked on together, each square decorated with their handprints and names. "We will miss you, Mrs. Thornton," said Sarah, one of her oldest students, a girl of 13 with serious eyes and a quick mind. "But we are so happy for you and Mr. Thornton." Eleanor hugged each child goodbye, tears streaming down her face, and promised to visit once the baby was born. Then Caleb drove her home to the ranch, and she settled into the strange new rhythm of waiting, of preparing the nursery and sewing baby clothes and trying not to worry about all the things that could go wrong. "Everything will be fine," Caleb assured her whenever her fears got the better of her. "You are strong and healthy, and Mary will be here to help when the time comes. We are going to meet our baby, Eleanor, and it is going to be wonderful." She clung to his confidence, to his steady presence, and as summer arrived and her due date approached, she felt a growing excitement that outweighed her fear. She was going to be a mother. She and Caleb were going to have a family. It was more than she had dared to hope for, more than she had thought possible a year ago when she had stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but grief and $14 to her name. The baby came on a hot August night, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Eleanor's water broke while she was fixing dinner, and the labor pains started soon after, coming hard and fast. Caleb rode for Mary while Eleanor paced the bedroom, breathing through the contractions and trying to stay calm. Mary arrived within the hour, calm and capable, and took charge immediately. "You are doing wonderfully," she assured Eleanor as another contraction seized her. "First babies often come fast, and this one seems eager to meet you." The labor lasted 8 hours, 8 hours of pain and effort, and Caleb holding her hand and whispering encouragement. And then, just as the sun was rising over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her baby's first cry. "It is a boy," Mary said, laying the squalling infant on Eleanor's chest. "A healthy, perfect baby boy." Eleanor looked down at her son, at his red face and waving fists and the dark hair plastered to his head, and felt a love so fierce it stole her breath. He was real, was here, was hers and Caleb's, and she could not stop the tears that poured down her face. "He is beautiful," Caleb said, his own voice thick with emotion as he gazed down at them both. "Eleanor, he is perfect." They named him Thomas James, after Eleanor's first husband and Caleb's father, a way of honoring the past while celebrating the future. Little Tommy, as they quickly started calling him, was a good baby, healthy and strong, and Eleanor fell into the rhythms of motherhood with a joy she had not anticipated. The sleepless nights and endless feedings were exhausting, but every time she looked at her son, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Caleb was a wonderful father, patient and gentle and completely besotted with his son. He would hold Tommy for hours, walking him around the house when he was fussy, singing to him in a low voice that never failed to soothe. Watching them together, Eleanor felt her heart expand to a size she had not known was possible. September arrived, and with it a letter from the mayor asking if Eleanor planned to return to teaching. She discussed it with Caleb one evening after Tommy had finally fallen asleep. "I want to," she admitted. "I miss the children, miss feeling like I am making a difference. But I do not want to neglect Tommy either." "You could take him with you," Caleb suggested. "Set up a cradle in the schoolhouse. The children would love having a baby around, and you could feed him and care for him between lessons." Eleanor considered it, and the more she thought about it, the more right it felt. So when October came and the school year began again, Eleanor returned to teaching with Tommy in tow. It was chaotic at times, trying to manage 20 students and an infant, but the children adored their littlest classmate, and the older girls fought over who got to hold him during lunch. The year turned, and with it came new seasons, new challenges, new joys. Tommy grew into a chubby, happy toddler who loved the horses and cattle and spent hours following his father around the ranch. Eleanor taught through another school year, and when summer came again, she discovered she was pregnant for the second time. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and in March of 1885 she gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline Rose. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect and right. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The ranch prospered under Caleb's careful management, and they slowly began to build the house on the land he had given Eleanor, a larger place where their growing family would have more room to spread out. It took 3 years to complete, built in stages as time and money allowed, but when they finally moved in during the spring of 1888, Eleanor stood in the main room and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was hers. The land, the house, the life she had built. No one could take it from her, and more than that, she did not want to be anywhere else. Silver Creek was home now, Montana Territory was home, and the people she had come to love were her family. Tommy started school that fall, sitting in his mother's classroom with the other children, and proving to be as bright as his parents had hoped. Caroline toddled around the schoolhouse, charming everyone with her sunny disposition, and Eleanor juggled teaching and motherhood with a grace she had not known she possessed. In 1889, Montana achieved statehood, and the whole town celebrated with a festival that lasted 3 days. Eleanor and Caleb took the children to watch the parade, and as they stood there with Tommy on Caleb's shoulders and Caroline in Eleanor's arms, she thought about how far she had come. 6 years ago, she had arrived in this town with nothing but grief and a single bag of belongings. Now she had a husband who loved her, 2 beautiful children, a career that fulfilled her, and a home that was truly hers. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, leaning close so she could hear him over the noise of the celebration. "How lucky I am," Eleanor said simply. "How blessed." Caleb kissed her temple, his arm coming around her waist. "I am the lucky one," he said. "You gave me everything, Eleanor, everything that matters." They stood there together, watching the parade and the fireworks that followed, their children laughing and pointing at the bright explosions of color in the night sky. And Eleanor thought about the widow she had been, drowning in grief and seeing no future beyond the next empty day. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime, and while Eleanor would never forget her or the man she had loved and lost, she was grateful to have become someone new. Someone who knew that loss was not the end of the story, that grief could coexist with joy, that it was possible to honor the past while fully embracing the future. Someone who had learned that love came in many forms, that it could heal even the deepest wounds, that it could give meaning to a life that had felt meaningless. The years continued to pass, bringing with them new challenges and new blessings. In 1891, Eleanor gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Daniel. The ranch continued to grow, and eventually they hired hands to help with the work, young men who looked up to Caleb and learned from his steady wisdom. Tommy grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as his mother did, and showed a gift for working with animals. Caroline was all fire and determination, insisting on learning to ride as soon as she could walk and refusing to be left behind when her father and brother worked the cattle. Daniel was the baby, sweet-natured and affectionate, content to spend hours playing in the dirt or helping Eleanor in the garden. Eleanor continued to teach until 1895, when the school board hired a younger woman to take over, and Eleanor finally stepped back to focus fully on her family and the ranch. It was strange at first, not having the daily rhythm of lessons and students, but she found other ways to contribute to the community, organizing a lending library and teaching Sunday school and helping new settlers adjust to life in Montana. In 1898, Tommy turned 16, a young man now rather than a boy, and he told his parents he wanted to go to college back east to study veterinary medicine. Eleanor's first instinct was to say no, to keep him close and safe, but Caleb reminded her gently that they had raised their son to be independent, to pursue his dreams, and they had to trust him to make his own way in the world. So they let him go, though Eleanor cried for a week after he left, missing him with an ache that felt surprisingly like the grief she had carried all those years ago. But Tommy thrived in his studies, came home for summers full of stories and knowledge, and eventually graduated with honors. He returned to Montana to set up a practice in Silver Creek, and Eleanor felt the deep satisfaction of knowing her son had found his calling. Caroline announced at 18 that she intended to run the ranch alongside her father, that she had no interest in marriage or domestic life, and wanted to build the largest cattle operation in the state. Caleb was delighted, and together they expanded the herd, bought more land, and established a reputation for quality livestock that spread throughout Montana and beyond. Daniel was the artist of the family, the dreamer who spent hours sketching the landscape and the animals and the people around him. He eventually moved to San Francisco to study at an art school, and though Eleanor worried about him in that distant city, his letters were full of joy and purpose, and she knew he had made the right choice. The turn of the century came, and with it, a new era. Silver Creek grew from a small frontier town into a proper city, with electricity and telephones and paved streets. The Wild West of Eleanor's early days was fading into memory, replaced by modernity and progress, but the ranch remained much as it had always been, a place where hard work and the land and the changing seasons still dictated the rhythm of life. In 1905, Eleanor and Caleb celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together everyone they had come to know and love over the decades. Tommy was there with his new wife, a smart, kind woman named Ruth who had come west to teach and fallen in love with the young veterinarian. Caroline came in from the far pastures, sunburned and happy, full of plans for the ranch's future. Daniel traveled all the way from California, bringing paintings he had done of the Montana landscape that made Eleanor cry with their beauty. The Watsons were there too, older and grayer but still warm and kind, still the friends who had welcomed Eleanor when she was a grieving stranger and helped her build a new life. Mary pulled Eleanor aside during the party and said, "You remember that first Sunday when we invited you to lunch?" I knew then that you and Caleb were meant for each other. I have never seen two people more perfectly suited." Eleanor hugged her, this woman who had been like a mother to her. "I was so broken then," she said. "I did not think I would ever feel whole again." "But you did," Mary said firmly. "You let yourself heal, let yourself love again, and look at the beautiful life you have built. I am so proud of you, dear." That night, after the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Eleanor and Caleb sat on the porch of the house he had given her all those years ago, watching the stars wheel overhead in the vast Montana sky. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest in a position that had become as natural as breathing over 2 decades together. "Coming west, marrying me, building this life." Eleanor thought about it seriously, thought about the woman she had been and the woman she had become, thought about Thomas and the life she had lost and the life she had found. "No," she said finally. "I will always carry some grief for what I lost, for the future Thomas and I did not get to have. But I do not regret any of this. You gave me land when I had nothing, gave me a reason to live when I thought I had none. You gave me love and children and a home, and I would not trade any of it for the world." Caleb pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You gave me all those things too," he said quietly. "I was just existing before you came into my life, just going through the motions. You taught me how to live again, how to hope, how to love. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Eleanor Thornton." She tilted her head up to kiss him. This man who had been her salvation and her partner, and her truest love for more than 20 years. They were both older now, their hair streaked with silver, their faces lined by sun and wind and laughter. But the love between them had only deepened with time, had grown roots that went down to bedrock and could withstand any storm. "I love you," she said, and meant it with the same fierce certainty she had felt on that December day when she had married him. "I love you too," Caleb replied. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the years we have left." They sat there together as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other in grief and built a life of extraordinary joy. The ranch stretched out around them, the land that Eleanor had claimed and made her own, and in the distance, she could hear the lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through grass, and all the quiet sounds of home. In 1910, Tommy and Ruth gave Eleanor and Caleb their first grandchild, a baby girl they named Eleanor after her grandmother. Holding that tiny, perfect infant in her arms, Eleanor felt the circle complete in a way that brought tears to her eyes. She had come west as a widow with nothing but grief, and now she was a grandmother, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and a love that had sustained her through nearly 3 decades. Caroline surprised everyone by falling in love with one of the ranch hands, a quiet, hard-working man named Jack who treated her as an equal partner and shared her passion for ranching. They married in 1912, and Caroline did not give up her work, instead expanding it to include Jack's skills and knowledge. Together, they made the ranch even more successful, and Eleanor took pride in watching her daughter thrive in the life she had chosen. Daniel continued to paint in California, eventually gaining recognition as a significant Western artist whose landscapes captured the wild beauty of Montana. His paintings hung in galleries across the country, and Eleanor kept every article written about him, every review that praised his talent. He never married, seemed content with his art and his solitary life, and Eleanor learned to accept that happiness came in many forms. The years brought losses too. Mary Watson died in 1915, and Eleanor wept for the woman who had been such an important part of her life, who had welcomed her when she was a stranger and loved her like a daughter. Jim followed 2 years later, and Eleanor and Caleb attended the funeral with heavy hearts, knowing that an era was passing, that the people who had helped them build their lives were fading away. But there were new joys to balance the sorrows. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with laughter and noise and the chaos of young life. Tommy and Ruth had 3 more children. Caroline and Jack had 2 boys who were wild as colts and just as beloved. The house Eleanor and Caleb had built together was always full of family, of Sunday dinners and birthday celebrations and holidays that brought everyone home. In 1923, Eleanor and Caleb celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary quietly, just the 2 of them on the porch where they had spent so many evenings over the decades. They were both in their 60s now, slowing down but still strong, still vital, still deeply in love. 38 years, Eleanor mused, her hand clasped in Caleb's. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that we met, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Caleb said with the wisdom that had always been one of his defining characteristics. Love exists outside of time somehow. It is both a moment and an eternity. Eleanor looked at him, at the face she knew better than her own, at the man who had saved her life in every way that mattered. "I would not change a single day," she said. "Not the hard ones, not the sad ones, not even the ones where we fought or struggled or did not know how we would get through. It all brought us here to this moment, and I would not trade that for anything." Caleb raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "The widow came west with nothing but grief," he said softly, "and became the woman who gave me everything worth having. Thank you, Eleanor, for saying yes, for taking a chance, for building this life with me." "Thank you for giving me land," Eleanor replied, emotion thick in her voice. "And for giving me a reason to live again when I thought I had lost all my reasons. Thank you for loving me." They sat together as the sun set over the Montana prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange and purple, and Eleanor thought about the long journey that had brought her here. From the grief-stricken widow stepping off a stagecoach in a strange town to the woman she was now, surrounded by love and family, and a life richer than anything she could have imagined. The ranch would continue after they were gone, she knew. Caroline and Jack would keep it running, would pass it on to their children, and the land Caleb had given her all those years ago would remain in the family, a testament to the love that had started it all. Tommy's children would grow up with stories of their grandparents, of how they had met and fallen in love, and built something lasting from the ashes of grief. And someday, when Eleanor and Caleb were both gone, when they were just memories and stories told by firelight, their love would still echo through the land, through the house they had built, through the lives of the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would carry their legacy forward. But that was the future, and for now they were still here, still together, still finding new ways to love each other after nearly 4 decades of marriage. Caleb squeezed her hand, and Eleanor squeezed back, and they watched the stars come out one by one in the vast Montana sky, content in the knowledge that they had lived fully, loved deeply, and created something beautiful that would long outlast them both. In 1927, Silver Creek held a celebration for its 50th anniversary as an incorporated town, and Eleanor and Caleb were honored as 2 of the community's oldest and most respected members. They stood on a platform in the town square, surrounded by hundreds of people, and the mayor gave a speech about their contributions to the area, about how the ranch had provided employment and economic stability, about how Eleanor's years of teaching had educated generations of children. But more than any of that, the mayor talked about how Eleanor and Caleb represented the best of what it meant to build a life in the West, how they had faced hardship and loss and chose to create something beautiful anyway, how their love and partnership had been an example to everyone who knew them. Eleanor felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she listened, overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection from the community she had come to call home. When it was her turn to speak, she looked out at the sea of faces, saw her children and grandchildren in the front row, saw the town that had given her a second chance at life, and she knew exactly what she wanted to say. "When I came to Silver Creek 45 years ago, I was broken," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "I had lost everything that mattered to me, and I did not know how to go on. But this town welcomed me, gave me work and friendship and community. And one man in particular gave me the greatest gifts I have ever received: land to call my own, and a reason to live again." She turned to look at Caleb, who was watching her with so much love in his eyes that her heart ached with the beauty of it. "My husband taught me that grief does not have to be the end of the story, that it is possible to honor what you have lost while still embracing what you have found. He taught me that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that life is always worth living if you are brave enough to keep showing up for it." She looked back at the crowd. "I came west with nothing but grief, but I found land and love and a life beyond anything I could have imagined. And I want every person here, especially those who are struggling, who have lost something precious, who think they cannot go on, to know that there is always hope. There is always the possibility of a new beginning, a second chance, a love that makes everything worthwhile. Thank you, Silver Creek, for being that second chance for me. And thank you, Caleb, for being my reason to live." The crowd erupted in applause, and Eleanor stepped down from the platform into Caleb's waiting arms, and they held each other as the celebration swirled around them. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would stand the test of time. The seasons continued their endless cycle. Spring brought new calves and the return of green to the prairie. Summer blazed hot and bright, the land turning gold under the relentless sun. Autumn painted the cottonwoods in shades of amber and scarlet. Winter covered everything in white, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of silence and stillness. And through it all, Eleanor and Caleb remained, anchors for their family, pillars of their community, partners in every sense of the word. They aged together gracefully, supporting each other through the aches and pains of growing older, celebrating each birthday and anniversary as the precious gifts they were. In 1932, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a party that rivaled the town's anniversary celebration 5 years earlier. The entire ranch was transformed, with tables set up outside under strings of lights, and what seemed like half of Montana turned out to honor the couple who had become legends in their own time. Eleanor wore a dress of pale blue silk, and Caleb wore his best suit, and they danced together under the stars just as they had at their wedding 50 years earlier. Eleanor's head rested on Caleb's shoulder, and his arm was steady around her waist, and they moved together with the ease of two people who had been partners for half a century. 50 years, Caleb murmured into her hair. "How did we get so lucky? We chose each other," Eleanor replied simply. "Every day, through everything, we kept choosing each other. That is where the luck is." Their children and grandchildren watched them dance, and Eleanor caught Tommy's eye and saw him smile with pride and affection. Caroline stood with Jack, her hand in his, their own long marriage a testament to the example her parents had set. Even Daniel had come home from California for the celebration, and he stood at the edge of the crowd with his sketchbook, capturing the moment in charcoal and paper. The party lasted long into the night, and when it was finally over and the last guests had gone home, Eleanor and Caleb walked slowly back to their house, hand in hand under a sky full of stars. They were both exhausted, their feet aching and their voices hoarse from so much talking and laughing, but they were happy in a way that transcended the physical discomfort. "That was perfect," Eleanor said as they reached the porch. "Everything about today was perfect." "Because we were together," Caleb said, pulling her close for a kiss that was as sweet and tender as any they had shared in 50 years of marriage. "That is all that has ever mattered." They sat on the porch swing that Caleb had built decades earlier, Eleanor tucked against his side, and watched the dawn begin to break over the prairie. The light came slowly, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and lavender. "I want you to know," Eleanor said quietly, "that loving you has been the great privilege of my life. You saved me, Caleb. You gave me everything when I had nothing, and you never asked for anything in return except the chance to love me. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God every day that you walked into my life." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and when Eleanor looked up, she saw tears on his weathered cheeks. "You saved me too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I was so lonely before you came, so lost. And then you stepped off that stagecoach in your black dress with your sad eyes, and I knew somehow that you were the one I had been waiting for. Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life, Eleanor. You made me believe in second chances, in the possibility of happiness after loss. You gave me children and grandchildren and a home full of love. You gave me everything." They held each other as the sun rose fully, washing the prairie in golden light, and Eleanor felt a peace so profound, it seemed to fill every empty space inside her. She had lived a long life, a full life, a life marked by both tragedy and triumph, grief and joy, loss and love. And through it all, she had been blessed beyond measure. The years that followed were gentler, quieter. Caleb's health began to fail slowly, his steps growing slower, his breath coming shorter. But he remained sharp-minded and full of love, and Eleanor cared for him with the same devotion he had always shown her. She read to him on the porch in the afternoons, helped him take walks around the property he loved, sat with him through the nights when sleep would not come. In the spring of 1936, Caleb took a turn for the worse. The doctor came and shook his head gravely, and Eleanor knew what it meant even before he said the words. "Make him comfortable," the doctor told her gently. "It will not be long now." Eleanor sent word to the children, and they all came home, gathering around their father's bedside in the house he had built with his own hands. They took turns sitting with him, holding his hand, telling him how much they loved him, how grateful they were for everything he had given them. But at night, it was just Eleanor and Caleb, alone together as they had been so many nights over the past 53 years. She lay beside him in their bed, holding his hand, listening to the labored sound of his breathing. "I am not afraid," Caleb whispered one night, his voice so weak she had to lean close to hear him. "I have lived a good life, Eleanor, the best life, because of you. Please do not leave me," Eleanor whispered back, though she knew it was selfish. He was in pain, was ready to go, and she should let him go with grace and love. But the thought of losing him, of facing even a single day without him, was almost more than she could bear. "I will always be with you," Caleb said, reaching up with trembling fingers to touch her face. "In this land we loved, in the children we raised, in every sunrise and every star. You will never be alone, my love. I promise you that." He died just before dawn, slipping away so quietly that at first Eleanor did not realize he was gone. She lay beside him, holding his hand, and felt the exact moment when his spirit left his body, when the man she had loved for more than 5 decades was no more. The grief was devastating, a return to that hollow, empty place she had known when Thomas died, but it was different too. Because she was not the same woman she had been then, broken and lost with nowhere to turn. She had children who loved her, grandchildren who needed her, a community that supported her. And she had memories, decades of beautiful memories that no amount of grief could take away. They buried Caleb on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a headstone that read, "Beloved husband, father, grandfather, he gave land and love to all who knew him." The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, all of them touched in some way by Caleb's kindness and generosity. And Eleanor stood at the graveside surrounded by her family and felt both heartbroken and grateful. Heartbroken because she had lost the love of her life, the man who had saved her and loved her and built a beautiful life with her. But grateful too, so deeply grateful, because she had been blessed with 53 years of marriage to a man who had shown her what true love looked like, who had given her more happiness than she had ever thought possible. The days after the funeral were hard, the house feeling empty and too quiet without Caleb's presence. But Eleanor did not let herself retreat into grief the way she had after Thomas died. She got up every morning, took care of the ranch with Caroline's help, visited with her grandchildren, attended church and community events. She lived, actively and deliberately, because that was what Caleb would have wanted. One afternoon, a few months after Caleb's death, Eleanor walked out to the valley where he had brought her all those years ago, the land he had given her when she had nothing. The house they had built together stood solid and strong, surrounded by the prairie that stretched to the horizon in every direction. She sat on the porch and looked out at the land, at the cattle grazing and the stream sparkling in the sunlight, and felt Caleb's presence as surely as if he were sitting beside her. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind, to the sky, to whatever part of him might still linger. "Thank you for giving me land and a reason to live. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for everything." She lived for another 7 years, watching her grandchildren grow up and start families of their own, seeing the ranch continue to prosper under Caroline and Jack's management, taking pride in Tommy's thriving veterinary practice and Daniel's growing fame as an artist. She remained active and engaged with life, refusing to let age or grief slow her down any more than necessary. On a warm evening in June of 1943, Eleanor sat on her porch watching the sunset, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders against the slight chill in the air. She was 82 years old, had lived through 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and more changes than she could count. But the land remained constant, the sky still stretched infinite overhead, and the love she had known with Caleb still burned bright in her heart. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that grief-stricken widow stepping off a stagecoach to the matriarch of a large and loving family. She thought about Thomas, her first love, and smiled at the memory of him, able now to remember the good times without being crushed by the loss. She thought about Caleb, her second love, her true partner, the man who had given her everything. And she thought about the land, this beautiful valley that had been Caleb's gift to her, that had become her anchor and her legacy. It would continue after she was gone, would pass to her children and grandchildren and the generations yet to come, a testament to a love that had transformed 2 broken people into something whole and beautiful and lasting. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Eleanor closed her eyes and felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had lived fully, loved deeply, and created something meaningful that would long outlast her. She had come west with nothing but grief, and found land and love and a life richer than any she could have imagined. And now, finally, she was ready to rest. Ready to be reunited with Caleb, to tell him about everything that had happened in the years since he had left, to thank him one more time for saving her life in every way that mattered. The widow who had come west with nothing but grief passed away peacefully that night, surrounded by the land and the legacy she had built, her heart full of love and gratitude for the extraordinary second chance she had been given. And in death as in life, she and Caleb remained together, their love story complete, their legacy secure, their memory a blessing to all who had known them. The ranch they had built together continued to thrive for generations, a testament to the power of love and resilience, and the belief that it is never too late for a new beginning, that grief does not have to be the end of the story, and that sometimes the greatest love comes when you are brave enough to open your heart again after loss.